Someone mentioned, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's been at the Trump briefings pretty much every night. Some nights it seems like he's on the way out, and some nights it seems like he's on the way in. And he's got a very doctor presence to him, kind of like your childhood doctor, that always make everything feel good. He's got that doctor sensibility, very kind of trustworthy and calm. And so, in a media presence, he's very good. But then when I start learning more, people are saying, a lot of these people in the establishment are of this type, whereas let's find a germ and let's try to kill it with something. Let's find a germ and let's try to kill it with something. I think that's kind of what you were just alluding to previously, as in kind of the whole process of this is potentially flawed. And then when you start looking into Fauci, you start looking into vaccines. And then, of course, lately there's a lot of talk about Bill Gates and then the Event 201. So I don't know where we begin because there's quite a few things there. Maybe we start with some of this concept of, guys looking for germs in the establishments and looking for fixes. Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that you're, a young person and you want to be a scientist and you want to study viruses, right? So you do your undergraduate work, you try to get good grades, you try to get your name on a research paper, and then you apply to graduate school. And when you start in graduate school, how you perform there is going to determine if you get a job afterwards or not. And it's going to determine if you're able to defend your thesis accurately and earn that PhD. But the orientation of all the academic departments who award this PhD and who train these future virologists, they all adopt the dogma of germ theory. So it's presupposed before you even start to do any studies. And so when you start to learn the protocols, they basically teach you the same protocols that I described earlier that are done for all the studies where they allege that they're isolating and identifying a new virus. And you never question that underlying premise that viruses cause disease. You just, of course, it's true. They told me it was true. I've known it since I was a young lad. I've seen people get sick and pass colds to each other, and that was by a virus. And so you never question that. And then that's the underlying, it's like your identity. It's like it's like your underwear that you put on every day, that it's always there and it always underlies everything. And so then you learn the techniques and you want to get a good job, maybe with a university, maybe in the pharmaceutical industry, or even with the government. And of course, they want to see that you also adopt the same kind of methods and ideas that they have. And then you look at how the research is funded, and most of the funding comes from government grants. And all the government grants with respect to viruses are all based on the germ theory model. So there's really no room to come up in that system and have different ideas. And this is one of the advantages that I've had, not being a formally trained virologist, but being someone who has experience and knowledge about reading scientific papers and statistics, that I don't have to accept any premise because I'm not beholden to that. I have nothing invested in it in terms of my career or finances. So I can look at this thing as an outsider and say, well, what do these studies really show? Because I definitely have spent a lot of time learning how to design experiments and the various principles of how you use a scientific experiment to draw a certain conclusion. And I'm able to see that they're actually not following those basic rules. I mean, like, for example, one rule is to separate variables, what's called dependent variables, in order to measure the effect of each individual variable on the outcome. And when you combine a bunch of them together, then you don't know which one is influencing the outcome. And they have not followed that basic tenet because they've not purified the different chemicals or cells, which would be the way to separate the variables. But interestingly, when you look at the virology science outside of disease-causing viruses, but look at viruses that have been identified in lower organisms like bacteria or amoebas or algae, they do actually follow those principles in those studies. So it's quite interesting because they've developed the standard methods of how do you purify and isolate a virus in its pure form and then observe it so that you can characterize it. But when it comes to human viruses, they have just put this aside. And so there is one example that I know of a mainstream virologist whose name is Dr. Stefan Lanka, and he's a German virologist. And he actually, earlier in his career, discovered one of these viruses that is present in sea algae. Now, he also uncovered some evidence that the virus in sea algae is actually not destructive, but actually helps the algae survive in difficult times or difficult environmental conditions. So once he made this discovery and was thinking about where he would like to go next with his research, he started looking at viruses alleged to cause human disease because he thought he could do some good learning about these, maybe help people's health. But when he started looking at it, he uncovered the same flaws in the scientific method that I uncovered, and where their virus was never purified, and so it was unable to prove that it existed. So after he started talking about this in public and received a lot of scrutiny, as you might imagine, he decided to issue a challenge, and he put out a challenge for the measles virus. And he said if anyone can provide the scientific papers that prove the measles virus exists, that he would pay them $100,000. And so some people did submit papers, but they were not sufficient to prove this because the research hasn't done that. But there was one person that was very certain that he actually had the proof. And so he took Dr. Lanka to court. And this court case went all the way up to the German Supreme Court. And the German Supreme Court had to have expert witnesses in order to weigh in on this because the judge was unable to, instruct the jury properly or make a determination on their own. And I think that was very wise. And I think it was very embarrassing for the scientists that had to do this because they had to concede that actually there's no proof that measles exist. And so Stefan Lanka was vindicated by the Supreme Court. So what I'm saying is that the Supreme Court of Germany actually ruled that there is no measles virus that's been proven to exist.